If we get quantum computing going and we get some of the AI working in conjunction with that, where I see it going, and it may not be as far away as it used to be, is the ability to sort of map, the body map.
If you are an entrepreneur, you're also an investor, and my question to you will be, what makes biotech startups truly investable today?
Some of my key scientists used to have to spend with suitcases walking from library to library. Well, now it's all available to us all of the time. It's online, and you can even have AI interpreting it for you, cutting out the middleman of the length of time and actually getting a summarized outcome.
What do you think, Glenn, that will be the single most transformative change in healthcare that is going to be driven by biotech innovation?
I think it's more about the approach, the tools, the objectives, the way in which you can move fast, you can guess less.
Welcome to the Tech Foresight podcast, where we dive deep into the future of innovation, technology, and business with the brightest minds shaping our tomorrow. I am your host. I am Diana Daniels, a Mexican entrepreneur working in telecommunications and blockchain. And in this episode, we're going to explore the intersection of biotech innovation, strategic investment, and how therapies like the Ozempics of today are not just reshaping the healthcare, but also redefining the future of medicine. And to guide us through this phase of change, today we have a true pioneer in the world of biotechnology and venture capital, Mr. Glen Travers. Glen, thank you for being with us.
Hi, Diana. Very nice to be here.
Well, Glen is a seasoned entrepreneur and biotech leader with over 3 decades of experience. He co-founded Western Capital Limited and Cortex Limited. And he's been playing a key role in groundbreaking innovations like the global recognized Helicobacter diagnostic. He's also working in the oral bronchitis vaccine and the pioneering developments in the oral insulin and the oral GLP-1 therapies. Glen has successfully led companies through the IPOs, major equity raises, and transformative mergers. Today, he is remaining at the forefront of the healthcare innovation, focusing in metabolic and biopharmaceuticals, and also in cutting-edge therapeutic solutions. So it's amazing that we have you, Glen, and thank you again with us.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to a discussion about biotechnology and the changes.
Listen, everything that is happening today is just amazing. You know, these GLP-1 receptor agonists with for the rest of the people like me, you know, to understand this is kind of like the Ozempic type of the poster child, and that is today they're not just medications; they are coming cultural phenomenon. And they started, if I remember, you told me about this like maybe a couple of years ago, that they started as diabetes, but their potential has become bigger. You know, they're addressing obesity and metabolic disorders, and they have turned them not only into a medical frontline, but also into a multi-billion-dollar blockbusters. Analysts are predicting that the global GLP-1 market could surpass the 100 billion by 2030. So what do you see, Glen, as the most exciting opportunity, and what could be also the biggest challenge when it comes to the future of these GLP-1 therapies, and what is their role in the healthcare of their, let's say, the next decade?
So it has been a little bit serendipitous that the GLP-1 drugs were noticed that during the diabetic treatment regime, some of the patients lost weight, and these were the earlier versions of the drug. They were having quite a significant impact on diabetes, though. They were controlling glucose very well, glucose levels in the body very well. But the unexpected observation that there was a direct link with taking the drug and losing weight was only came quite some years later, really. And I think it's part of that continuum about what is the issue for healthcare in our world today. And the primary issue is that, unfortunately, the advancements that have been made in foods and the refinement of foods and the mass production of foods has invariably led us into eating regimes that have not always gone according to plan, let's put it that way. And as a result of that, it certainly created what they called the epidemic of diabetes. And that was because I remember in the turn of the century, there were about 5% of the world's population was suffering from diabetes, diagnosed and undiagnosed, and now it's 10%, and it's growing still rapidly. And then when you look at the ongoing effect of the impact of this eating, let's call it disorder, and it could be now a disease, it actually turns out that the flow on from the impact of eating not well, perhaps not being as mobile as we were before, etc. We've found ourselves in a situation where diabetes also leads or comes from obesity. The two are sort of parallel running. Obesity and diabetes have very significant impact on cardiovascular issues, your heart attacks, etc. Then you go into strokes, and then you go into for certain cancers where there's a direct linkage with the disorders. And 16 other cancers that are impacted by it. So, and then you think, oh well, that's huge, because if you look at the top drugs and the top treatments and the top issues for diseases, they're covered by pretty much those in some ways. But you then go on to the newer areas which are being pioneered for dementia and Alzheimer's and even sleep apnea and these kind of issues, and we find that they're all linked. And not all completely 100% linked, but they're linked. And so this whole explosion of need that's occurring in our society of healthcare expenditure is really sort of in this linkage. And so it's very important for us to consider if there was some way of getting control of this, and the remarkable possibilities with drugs following more natural pathways and yet being manufactured in very advanced systems has actually turned out that they could have a very, very significant impact on the future of the well-being of nations. And it's seemingly started from this very simple, but this one-dimensional opportunity has just exploded into so many different areas.
So if I'm hearing correctly, we're looking ahead that these drugs could become a cornerstone for preventive healthcare, right? And as we are navigating all these challenges, that the way that our consumption behavior has putting us in a way, I guess that probably the next step will be, how do we address accessibility, affordability, and then sustainability? Am I right?
Yeah, well, I think all of those things, when these drugs get approved, they are considered, and they have quality of life year calculations, which is sort of like a risk-benefit calculation that run through most of the systems now. So they're always considered in that context. I think what has become apparent is the interconnectedness of everything that happens in our bodies. And there's all these systems working with each other. And it used to be looked at in silos. When I first started out, it was very one-dimensional. You looked at heart disease and heart attacks, and then you looked at somebody who had a leukemia, or somebody who had a particular other cancer. They were all treated separately, and the specializations in the industry all fell into those categories. So now this cross-disciplinary aspect is really significant, and it's opening up hugely new horizons for opportunities to understand the interplay between the cellular functions in our body, the DNA and the interactions with RNA, the flow on into peptide synthesis and processing. That then leads on into treatments, or the body looking after itself or not. And you get all this senescence, where you have things that are not functioning properly and your cells start dying. And now you can see why they're dying, because it's not just because of one-dimensional function, it can be multi-dimensional functions. So all of these aspects are now becoming known and recognized and available because there's data supporting it. And I think that's been part of this amazing change that I've seen in the last 30 years, where ideas have become reality, and becomes supported by data. And I think that's the critical thing. If you haven't got the data, the idea is good and needs to be pursued, but you've got to make sure you get data out there. And that's what these drugs have done in the last 5 to 10 years. And I think we're seeing it across the board. The vaccine development that we saw for COVID, before that it was MRSA, SARS, and so on. There's all these different kinds of areas of the whole process of a body that are actually linked in some way. So we saw impact of people who had obesity and diabetes having a very poor outcome with COVID. With the disease. So and suddenly you go, well, hang on, what's the interrelationship between that? I thought vaccines were for a particular type of disease, and over there you're now telling me that what I'm eating and how I'm living my life is having a big impact on that. And I think more and more people are understanding those linkages now, and that then is triggering off all processes. But beyond that, the really critical thing about that is the capacity of us to put all this together in models, and in models that are only able to be contemplated when you've got the incredible capacity of computer and the chips working at speeds that have never been considered possible. And what they're able to do is start to monitor the likely outcomes of every reaction in a cellular function, and starting with the DNA and moving on from there. And then you're starting to understand, well, hang on, that's this particular movement of this RNA function has a yin and a yang to it. It's not just one dimensional. And that is very dependent on the environment in which it's functioning. And then you say, yes, but there's now 4 or 5 impacts on that environment, but you can now model it. And if we get quantum computing going and we get some of the AI working in conjunction with that, where I see it going, and it may not be as far away as it used to be, is the ability to sort of map, the body map, the cellular map of a body and all of the interactions that happen. And that is beyond any human contemplation just 20 years ago.
I love this because the innovation in biotech is not only about the scientific discoveries, it's about that bridging the gap between that groundbreaking research that you guys are doing, but also with the real world impact. And if we take the oral insulin revolution, for example, that scientific marvel that is promising to, I believe, what it will transform not only the diabetes, but also the health of many millions of the people in the world. But I'm always thinking about that journey from lab to pharmacy, right? And it's filled with challenges, the regulatory hurdles, and that under the unpredictability. It's not predictable, by the biology itself. So why don't you take us a little bit behind the scenes of how these transformative projects work? What are the biggest challenges that and that moment that when you realize this could change everything, and ideally how the world should work?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the incredible waste of time that I've had in my life. And that's a big part of tracking down the ideas to try and find solutions to these major problems. And early on in my existence, I started out in creating a venture capital business, and we invested in a few projects, 2 of which became world-renowned, actually, and I didn't really understand fully what I was doing, but it was well supported by high-quality people with all the skills and caliber. We were dumb enough to know to bring in the best of the best around us, and that made us. We were the more commercially minded people who wanted outcomes. It was great to do great research, but you had to push it forward, and without that, you don't get outcomes, and you don't change lives of people, which is really the objective of a lot of this. So I think I actually give the example to anybody who's interested in the number of weeks that some of my key scientists used to have to spend with suitcases walking from library to library to try and understand the context of the idea and how to solve it. And they would be looking for where's the publications for anything that's been done in the last 50 years to give us some clues. And I know that they used to just disappear with massive suitcases and come back like harvesting out of a world and sit down, and then they'd have to read it and they'd have to understand all of it. Well, now it's all available to us all of the time. It's online, and you can even have AI interpreting it for you, cutting out the middleman of the length of time and actually getting a summarized outcome. It's not always right. It hallucinates, and there's downsides to it. But as my key scientist, partner who I love very dearly and have worked with for 30 years, he says to me, well, it's not always right. And I say, absolutely. But I have to say to him and to myself, in the context of the last 30 years, how often have we been always right? And so what it does very rapidly gives you the ability to see what competitors are doing, to pursue the thought about where you're heading with this. And also, you can now have much better predictive capability in terms of the models that are now being developed to show functions where you're modeling it with much better knowledge of what all these interactions are. In the past, you had to put things into an animal to see what happened. And it was like putting in a little test source, and you sit there and just hope and wait, and you never know what's going to come. Now, serendipitous outcomes happened, and they did happen for us, and so we made two major breakthroughs. But I have to say that it wasn't because we had logical, clear-minded thought process. It was more about let's give it a try and do trial and error, basically. So now a lot of that's taken out, and therefore the cost of development should come down if it weren't for the greater and greater need for more and more safety, because that also causes some desire to hold the process a little bit and just be sure of our ground and try not to do something really bad, which could cause a lot of problems later. So I'm not critical of that. I'm just saying that the two are counterbalancing each other a little bit, and it's a bit of a race between how fast we can go versus what are all the checks and balances that we have to have in place to make sure that we don't do something silly.
What I see is that biotech, your industry, is super thrilling, but it's also very risky, thinking about investment arenas. We've seen record-breaking IPOs and also spectacular failures. One of the things that I can think about is Moderna, for example. They went on IPO, was in 2018, was one of the largest biotech in history, raising $600 million. The company rapid development from this mRNA-based COVID vaccine, boosted the market value. And then I'm thinking of another case, which is just happened in September 2024, BioH Labs. The shares, they bought it like at $22.50, which is like 25% of the IPO price value, which came out of 18. They have a huge interest in the drug market. Then the IPO went, do I see the number, 757 million, which is like way up from the near to 400 million. But in December went crazy down, like 80% of the value went down because they decided to discontinue the drug that was doing for the promote the muscle atrophy, that also they're going to use it as well as the weight loss therapy. So they lost 80% out of the value. So for me, this is so risky. If you are an entrepreneur, you're also an investor. And my question to you will be, what makes biotech startups truly investable today? And how do you see this investment shifting in the next, let's say, 5 years?
Well, I think what I was saying about the predictability of outcomes is getting better. In the past, it was really rolling the dice every time. And I think the enhancement of the speed and accuracy and the ability to model outcomes much more clearly means that you perhaps don't have such a guessing game. And that obviously changes the dynamics of probability of success, etc. I think the examples of Moderna and BioH were two quite different outcomes, one of which was a huge success. I mean, Moderna was a huge human success for the planet. And yet you see the volatility of the shares and the price that you saw there from the successful sale of many outcomes for them, and then when the pandemic is over, that the need for that drug tails off. And so the question is, well, could it be valued in a sense that the underlying technology is a platform technology that could have applications to many other areas? And is it a market overreaction to maybe say that it's just a temporary setback for them. I don't know, but I just say that these reactions are driven by a lot of uh, high visibility and success, and then the question is what happens afterwards. I mean, even what was the largest pharmaceutical company in the world, Pfizer, suffered the same way. It wasn't just a biotech company that suffered like that. It was the major pharmaceutical company in the world for the same reason, because the weight in its P&L and balance sheet was so great for the positive outcome of the vaccines that it actually superseded everything. And I think we're seeing a little bit of the same kind of huge growth in the market caps of Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, the two anti-obesity and diabetes companies. I mean, they both have had the most extraordinary run-ups, to the point where Novo Nordisk became the largest company, not just pharmaceutical company, biotech company, the largest company in the whole of Europe. And that is unheard of, that a pharmaceutical company could get to that. But in the same vein as you just talked about with BioAge, they had made their own outlook for what the product might produce in the follow-up drug called CagriSema. And the market reacted terribly to what I saw as a very positive outcome for them, in that they got a 22% reduction in BMI at the end of 12-month treatment with this drug instead of 25%. And yet their semaglutide, which is selling 5 billion plus a year, is doing 15% reduction. So how do you suddenly weight that compared to what happened to the market reaction, which was it caused roughly a quarter of their market cap, of this very high market cap that grew, to come off. So $125 billion was lost in a day. And that was, probably one of the largest movements of the pharmaceutical life science industry ever. And it was because of what? A 3% difference. I mean, that can be sort of a rounding error in our lives, but it wasn't to them. So some of it is expectations that are built up around product potentials, and it happens in other industries as well. We're seeing it at the moment. So I think the thing that really is more uncertain and more concerning for investors is not so much that, because in those cases like Moderna and Novo, they have had very successful products, and if you were in at the right time, you have just multiplied many times over your money. I think the one that is the great risk for us is a negative outcome on clinical trials, and I mean really negative, like fail. So a failure is what you saw demonstrated with companies that don't meet their endpoints, which are, so that there's no second use of the drug, it's just gone. So that's when you have a whole company's value written off. And in fact, that's why our approach from the start, because I came at the whole industry in the context of venture capital, we were looking to get involved in projects where we felt that there was limited new chemical entity risk, where you do not know what the potential outcome was. And don't forget, this was many years ago now, where you really had low probabilities of success when you started. In fact, I used to go around the UK presenting a play with Ernst & Young's life science group, where I created this whole story about some mad scientist who made this terrific discovery, and on the first day he couldn't understand why he had his white hair out and his hat and everything already with his little bag, going to the city and explaining what a wonderful drug he was developing. And he couldn't understand why the real economic net value had a net present value of minus. And that was because the risks were so great compared to the investment you had to make, that actually, when you actually started that project, it was a negative net present value. And I would try and bring some reality into the thought process about biotechnology at the earliest stages. And that was because the probabilities were very low, because your ability to predict was so low. Now, not everybody understood that, but now the ability to predict is a lot higher. It's not like digging iron ore out of the ground and putting it on a ship. It's nothing like that. But it's actually a different way of weighting now, and there's much more sophisticated ways of doing it. So that whole process of looking at that kind of risk for me in those days was to not develop new chemical entities, but to look at trying to utilize the body's natural pathways. And that's why we were successful in developing the first oral vaccine against a chronic disease like chronic bronchitis, COPD, and we sold that out to large pharma in the 90s, and it was considered one of the 10 most important breakthroughs in science in Australia at the time. And in terms of what we were doing, we were using the body's own immune system, an area of the gut called the Peyer's patches, triggering that, and having the body produce the immune response, so that it protected all of the mucosal surfaces and had a great outcome, and no one had ever done it before. So that was a really interesting way of going at it, and the risk was low because all we had to do was trigger that part of the gut where these cells were, and that was a relatively simple thing to do, and you didn't have to use toxic agents to do it. And then the second area was looking at the Helicobacter story, was where, you know, it was understood that stress caused ulcers, and somebody, a very smart guy here called Barry Marshall, observed that actually it might be caused by bacteria. And so something that there was this whole dogma, and my grandmother died of a bleeding stomach ulcer, so I was really interested in it. And this whole dogma developed around this concept, which was totally wrong. And not totally wrong, and that's a bit harsh, but anyway, majority wrong. And if you wanted to cure it, you needed to get rid of the bacteria. And that could be done in 3 weeks with current therapies. So that kind of process was, again, very low risk. And so we backed those projects. What we didn't back was someone who came in and said, I've got this amazing structure, I've done this to the molecule, I've put this on the edge of it, I'm adding this to it. And you don't know what the off-target effects are of that. And so that becomes a whole different paradigm. And as a small company, or in my family situation where we're doing these oral insulin and oral GLP-1 projects, it's the same concept. We do not want to take the risk of the actual raw molecule. We want to transform its potential by placing it, targeting it in the body in a way that transforms its use. So our benefits that we're getting from oral insulin is we're completely avoiding hypoglycemia. It's one of the key things that makes mothers very frightened when their children are diagnosed as diabetics and they have to be treated with insulin, is the fact that if they take too much insulin, they can go into a coma. And unfortunately, the end product of that, if they're not treated quickly, is they pass away. And this was a bit of an interest of mine because of some relatives of mine. And so I thought, you know, this was something that we should be doing in a slightly different way. And that's why we deliver it in a certain way to the body to return the control to the liver. So we're allowing the liver to take control of the glucose function, not trying to force it through having a lot of this physiological action in the outer circulation. And then with the GLP-1 drugs, the same issue. They were actually being delivered in a different way than the body actually does it. And actually what we did was we found that we could deliver to the gut. And the gut had this amazing nerve ending coming, it's called the vagal nerve, and it runs right through the center of the body. All this knowledge come out in the last 15 to 20 years, but only applied to the obesity area in the last 5 or so years. And we could see that we could trigger that vagal nerve, which sends satiety messages to your brain. And so it actually then sends messages back to your stomach, to your liver, to your kidney, to your gut. And it's a cycle. And there's so much in your body. And this is what I was talking about at the start, this 360-degree cycle that happens even with one particular action. And you think it's just having an effect over there, but it's actually having an effect on your cell function. And it then branches out into, it's going to have a very nice impact in that area as well. Or it could alleviate some of the burdens of some of the cancer treatments, or this. There's so many ways you can go with it now. So, and in that way, we didn't have to take the risk that Big Pharma do, and rightly do, doing the very original work on the structure of molecules, or even the genetic testing, all of that. You know, you look at gene therapy, how long that's taken to produce. And I remember in the 90s, I couldn't raise money because gene therapy was taking it all. And in the 90s, there was no production of a therapy. So it took a decade or 2 decades to get through that process. So I think the message for us in those days, with the knowledge bases we had, without AI, without capacity of computers to do what they do today, having to trudge around the streets, looking at going into universities to get publications and see what you could find. All of that's just sped up so much and reduced the risk.
So if I see this amazing conversation, it's kind of like circles back into that everything is interconnected, right? And you brought us through the past, let's say the past 2 decades, and then if we think and then do a fast forward in the next 2 decades in the future, what do you think, Glenn, that will be the single most transformative change in healthcare that is going to be driven by biotech innovation?
That's
The $1 million questions, of course.
now $1 billion. It used to be $1 million.
It used to, yeah. Now million is nothing. It's $1 billion question.
I think it's there are a number of possibilities. I think the theme of what I've been saying about the recognition of the interconnectedness of all. You can go into quite a deep and meaningful discussion about that if you want, but I think that recognition is actually preventing failures. And therefore, whatever you turn your mind to, if you're looking for a particular cellular response or RNA response or peptide structure, or you can understand that it's not one-dimensional anymore, and in that way you probably fail less with toxicology issues or tox issues or unexpected issues on the body, and you can also be much more sure about what receptor, what structure you're trying to change, what are you trying to impact in the cell, and you can actually visualize that through the visualization technologies. So you're not only looking at the mechanics of the structure and the even the shape or the electric charge or the way in which it conforms or doesn't conform, or the way it affects its surroundings. There's so many interactions now that you can see very dramatically. And so I would just say that I think if we can put in our minds what the challenge is, and if that challenge becomes another epidemic, or if the challenge, we've already got challenges obviously with cancer, etc. I think once we start to really understand that, say, a particular cancer is actually 30 different diseases under one outcome. It affects your blood quality or whatever it is. These are understandings that you really had to know before you actually started to do your studies, because if you did a study thinking that it was going to affect that, and you might affect 1/5 of the patients, your statistical analysis of it, showing whether you've got statistical significance of it, fails. And yet a subgroup you might have actually done a brilliant job with, but you never really saw it because you had to do everything in this sort of amorphous mass that threw everything into one bucket, and it wasn't properly described. So I think there are some great technologies out there, CAR-T, and there's a whole array of them, but I think it's more about the approach, the tools, the objectives, the way in which you can move fast, you can guess less.
I love this because that gives me a really good interest into the next set of questions that I want to ask you, and it's about like the way that I think about biotech industry is not that it's just transforming medicine, but it's also reshaping the way that you guys work, that you hired, and that what are the skills that are matter the most. So if you think about like what are the needs that investor needs most from today's companies, what will be that?
I think when you were talking there, now I'm thinking all the things I could say, but one of the things that slightly scared me a little bit was the speed, which I was going to mention. The speed with which you can develop product means that you have a potential to enter into a market very rapidly, and maybe a little bit like Moderna. You find that the market's huge, and then it cycles into another stage. Now that's a very extraordinary example because an epidemic is what it is. But I think that rapidity of change is going to have an impact, and the impact is very positive when you're in there and riding high, and the impact is maybe less positive when you have competitors coming in fast and furious into the space, doing all sorts of innovative things. So I think it comes back to the potential of your imagination, because you don't become a competitor without having that imagination. You need to understand what the building blocks are. So, the sort of skill base that you need, or I think I need, I've worked with this most incredible partner for 30 years, and I find him the most extraordinary intellect. And he can play 13 different instruments. He speaks 7 different languages, including Mandarin and Russian, which are quite difficult languages for us to learn. And he's performed in major orchestras, and yet he is the most brilliant scientist. And a lot of his amazing discoveries will probably never be seen because there's so many things that he can do. But I think he tied in that sort of broader understanding to a very focused idea of what he needed to do to solve certain problems with me. And in particular, because I wanted to really help diabetes, I wanted to really help obesity, I wanted to help in the vaccine space, etc. I think that was, he could sort of put his mind to it with the Oxford graduate, you know, had gone and done study in various places, but he'd also worked in China as a scientist. So he learned a lot about the Eastern ways of living, the Eastern dimension, like in India, the chakras, in China, the meridians. You know, we're starting to learn that the vagal nerve looks a bit like a meridian. You know, it's so maybe there's thousands of years of knowledge is integrated into all of the things that we're trying to do today. But when you get very precise, you do need technical knowledge, and you do need that very precise understanding of what the interactions are going to be, because not everybody's capable of holding it all in their mind long enough to be able to see what the implications are for whatever it is you're trying to do. You know, because one off-target effect could blow you away. So you have to, you know, it does take some pretty amazing minds to be able to cope with it.
It's interesting, Glenn, because the other day in a conversation with Stanford professor Ilyas Rebuleyev, he was telling us that today Silicon Valley is not investing in companies that are not, or that they don't have AI as a native, right? As a native structure within their companies. So I hear for you, obviously, the piece of innovation, adaptability that these companies need to have. And when I think about like what will the employees of today's companies need, I guess that is that adaptability. But if we think about, let's say, the next 5 years or the next 10 years, if we just go a little bit further, because 5 years is already 2013, let's going to think 2035, right? What do you think that is one skill that the employees working for the next generation of biotech companies need?
Lack of fear. Lack of fear.
Lack of fear.
Because you know, I think if you can imagine the outcome of what it is, have that creative insight, let's call it that, you still need the technical confluence to happen at the same time to be able to meet that foresight. So the Jetsons could have changed the world, but they didn't, because it took so many years for all of the other technologies to come together. So I think it's actually a more openness to collaboration, cooperation, inputs from a range of different knowledge sources. I think to me that would equip you the best, but I don't know how you get that education so much now. You know, like we're still siloed with a lot of our knowledge bases, which is, you know, and I've sort of crossed over a little bit from, you know, pure finance into pure technology in a way. But I do think it's allowed me not to get to know the detailed technology, but to sit back and be able to say, well, this is what I need. Are there people who have that amazing capability? And you find them, they're out there, like maybe your Stanford professor. Those people are around there, and the most wonderful people to be around, because they are completely capable in their area and they're different. So you need to be able to cope with those. So I think that kind of, I'm not giving you an easy answer to this question, but I do think that going out 10 years or 15 years, people need to be able to absorb not one-dimensional inputs, and to be able to have a two-sided conversation with themselves about every decision made, because there's always a pro and a con. And so many of us, I barrack for Liverpool. I don't want to hear about Man U. So that's not a very good position. I won't really understand which is the better team. I'll always barrack for Liverpool. That kind of mentality is how a little bit we grew up, even in science and in other disciplines. And so you're not so open to listen to that person over there is completely wrong. Well, there's not that many things that are so clear. And that guy over there really knows what he's talking about. So I'm 100% going to follow him and he's always right. That also isn't the right thing. It's just trying to pull out the pearls of wisdom or the diamonds that come out of certain people's minds. And even people with what look like pretty poor outcomes in their academic or commercial careers occasionally come up with something that really is transformative.
I love this. And I love this piece because we're getting into this segment that I really like that is called the 4 Trends and 4 Dreams in the TED Foresight podcast. And here, the way that it works is that I'm going to ask you for 4 quick questions about trends shaping today biotechnology. And it's going to be followed by another 4 bold questions about your dreams, the dreams of the future. Think about 5 or 10 or even 25 years from now. The goal is that you are going to give us short, sharp answers, hopefully 1 phrase or 1 word if you can. Are you ready, Glenn?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the 4 trends. The most underappreciated biotech innovation today, what do you think is in a trend?
Trend. Most underappreciated, I would say, is preparedness to see the truth.
Interesting. What about the biggest challenge slowing down biotech innovation?
Moving too fast and not considering the patient.
Interesting. And which biotech field do you think will grow the fastest in the next 5 years?
I think the metabolic, because of that link that goes from food to immobility, change of lifestyle, taking us into eating in a different way with all the diseases that I mentioned earlier.
And what non-biotech technology you think is going to influence the most healthcare?
Quantum computing.
Oh, yeah, totally. Okay, so just give me then 4 very quick trends that you think that are happening.
Recognition of cell function, the interaction between cells and the source of the cell, which is the DNA, and then the next step is the relationship between the DNA is not everything about your disease. It moves into RNA, which then develops its own peptides, which then does what it does. And the last thing is that those activities along that physical pathway have this yin and yang. They have so many different impacts, and you've got to be aware that the solution may be there, and it may be in a direction that you weren't looking.
Love this. Now let's gonna go to 4 dreams. Give me, what do you think is that breakthrough that you hope to see in that metabolic health in the next decade?
I think separating out the genetic influences from the environmental influences, i.e. the source of a lot of the adjustments that some people seem unable to change their way of life to save themselves and have a better life.
And what about if like resources were not a barrier? What is that moonshot biotech project that you would love to pursue?
Well, I know that there's a very big movement on longevity and eternal life. That's not something for me, but I do think the reality of that idea is that you will end up having better quality of life for longer, and I think that's a really important thing to save people from having to go to hospital and chew up all of the available resources of economies.
So if we go back forward to 25 years from now, before, there's many things that have changed. You've been kind of like at the core and at the center of those changes. So what will be your boldest healthcare prediction for the next 25 years from now?
I think we will have solved most of the cancers.
Wow, that will be nice. That will be super nice to have. So in one word, can you describe the future of biotech?
Brilliant.
Love this. So I'm going to give you an extra dream. What it would be like your dream, one dream to come through for the next 5, 10, or 25 years? You tell me.
Peace on earth? No. My number one dream would be, in the biotech space, that we have many more successes than failures.
I love this. I love this. So I'm going to close with just 2 questions more about inspiration. What will be the advice that you will give to an entrepreneur starting today in the biotech space then?
Don't go blindly into an area believing your own story. Actually do all of the research that you can do on it at the moment, which is quite extensive, to make sure that you're not blindly following a dead end.
Oh, that's very nice. And if thinking through, what is the best piece of advice that you have ever received as a leader?
Don't believe your own story. Always question it. Always think about, you're hearing this information and you're receiving it from qualified sources. You need to be able to put it in a context where you don't become so aligned to it that you can't move direction either 1 degree or 180 degrees. And if you're open and can be prepared to take inputs to you, I think you'll have a much better and more successful outcome.
Oh my gosh, Glenn, today's conversation has been super inspiring, insightful, a lot of forward-looking, from that metabolic health breakthroughs to the future of biotech investments. You truly have given us a glimpse of what the world of where healthcare is either more accessible, hopefully more innovative and transformative. Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us, Glenn.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Diana. Enjoyed it, and it was all surprises.
Amazing. So thank you to our listeners. Thank you for coming to the Tech Foresight podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. So until next time, keep innovating and keep looking ahead. See you soon.